Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Happening. My name is Jorge Shaft, and I've got an exciting show planned for you today. We're going to be talking about Afghanistan. Didn't really want to, but then, stuff happened. Going to talk about schools. And, I've got like one small story there, but I'm going to broaden it out to a bigger thing. We'll talk about Northern Ireland. They've got a few interesting things going happening. And then, well, a lot of the whole new world basically got hurricanes. They're handing out candy. Hurricane season. Ooh. Let's go for our first topic, which for once I know I never do this. The first subject I listed is actually just going to be the first subject because it's just been so big. It's been so kind of put out there that it's like I kind of have to address it. It is Afghanistan. So for the third week in a row, I'm going to have to be talking about this country on the other side of the planet. This time, however, I'm doing so without looking like I belong in a militant faction in there, which is probably a good thing. I don't know. What did you think of the facial hair? Let me know in the comments of the Facebook live stream. I believe we're also on YouTube, and we're on a whole bunch of different other platforms because, of course, this is Relax Radio, and Relax Radio has got everything you could ever want. So, let's start. So you remember how last week I made I sort of discussed the fact that in Afghanistan there's been like this huge evacuation, uh, lots and lots of people been sort of airlifted out. It's actually been the biggest airlift in human history as of 2 days ago. Was it when I've last looked? The numbers of people evacuated have been over 100,000, which is amazing. It's a huge number. But then it was marred by tragedy when ISIS, or there's actually the Islamic State K, as they call it, is like their sort of regional kind of acronym, started bombing people. Not once, not twice, but 8 times. Which I don't think it's really a huge hot take to say that's not pleasant. I know, right? George has got the greatest, most controversial takes. 180 people being killed by bombs is a bad thing. And the figure is actually even worse than that. Because it was like 180 people were killed by all these bombs. Horrendous, absolutely horrific number, just on its own. Then over 1,000 people were heavily injured. But then you remember, oh yeah, heavily injured in a country that's just got new management, a country where the sort of Americans are packing out everyone they can out on planes, literally breaking world records on like how many people they're stuffing into these airplanes. And then in the midst of that, now we have this new element where, the new management of Afghanistan, the Taliban, are now basically starting to be fighting in a civil war against the ISIS people. It's like, oh great, now the sort of hardline, incredibly authoritarian Islamists, militias are now fighting the even more hardline, the even more authoritarian, the even more vicious Islamist militants. It's like, what in the... Oh boy, is that such a great choice, isn't it? To, live in life. Of course, you could always, I guess, join the resistance in Panjshir Valley, but, well, the problem with that is Panjshir Valley is one valley. I mean, it's a great valley to have. Basically, it's a natural fortress, but they've not been doing much of note ever since they took over there. This is the militias I was talking about last week under Ahmed Massoud, the kind of resistance rising up. And, well, I think you can tell my approval's kind of gone down, actually. I'll be real. I'm still like hugely in favor of like the withdrawal. I actually really do believe this kind of further vindicates the idea that like, yeah, we should have left and should have left a long time ago, because now it's like, okay, the Taliban are the new management, they've taken over, and now they're immediately fighting more malicious, even more extremist groups that have been rising up. Now, why would we want to stay for that? Just be referee for the two most evil factions you could possibly think of. But it has been really disappointing this week, not just because of the bombs, which have been an absolute tragedy, and makes your heart bleed for the friends and family of those who've been killed, and you're really hopeful that people who are injured, that they get a swift and full recovery. But at the same time, you just think, well, there were things that could have gone better, aren't there? A big story that came out this week, for example, was that the British embassy evacuated, which kudos in sort of all sorts of different ways. The British ambassador was one of the last British people to leave the whole country. He was filing out applications to leave Afghanistan to go to Britain, pretty much even as he was running on the airplane, pretty much. So it was just absolutely this intense, amazing act of heroism. But then as soon as the British left the embassy, the Taliban walked in, and they were like, wow, there's all sorts of papers on the ground. All of these papers, oh my God, it's all the names of all the people that that worked with the British in Afghanistan. Oh wow, we've now got the kill list, which is not very pleasant, to put it mildly. There was also a big discussion on some of the sort of heavy equipment as well. Now, this is not a new thing. Ever since the Afghan army under Ghani decided to just up sticks and leave, there was all sorts of discussion on now the Taliban have got sort of Black Hawks, they've got MRAPs, they've got these really advanced weapons and vehicles, and so on. But the full extent of what they've actually captured has now been sort of trickling out this past week, and it makes you kind of realize why were these things being given to Afghanistan? They have this big plane at one point. It came out this fighter jet, and it was why was that being given away? I think it's an F-35 fighter jet. No, I don't remember the details, which is disappointing. And it was just, hang on, since when? Don't those cost £50 million to make? And now it's just in the hands of the nutty Islamists? Okay, cool. That's not cool at all. And I was also really sort of disappointed when it came out also this week that the Americans, they gave this list of people, and they're like, hey Taliban, could you help these people go to the airport so they can leave, and because they're the interpreters and the allies and our friends and so on. Thanks. And it's okay, well, now you've given the Taliban again another kill list of, oh sweet, all the people we wanted dead, now we know who they are. Fantastic. Oh, we even got their aliases. It's awful. But as I've been saying many times now, and find myself repeatedly saying, it's, I guess, inevitable awful. There's been a whole bunch of different stats have been and figures I've been pointing out to. I've been pointing, for example, that in 2019, the Americans dropped over 7,320 bombs on Afghanistan. And it's how's that sustainable? That you have a country that goes to another country, occupies it for, at that point, it was 18 years, and yet still was dropping thousands of bombs per year. How's that sustainable? There's also the other one I've been pointing out to is the control maps of Afghanistan over time. And it's okay, in 2019, 18, 17, here's the map. And lo, behold, a bunch of the country already at that time is being administered and controlled by the Taliban. So clearly, the intervention can't be working that great if there's already like whole swaths of the country that couldn't even be controlled. And then this week also brought out to prominence because, in the middle of this whole cluster of disasters, to say it in a way without swearing, there was, a couple let on the slide, oh, hey, by the way, it turns out that there's all sorts of like horrible things that we did, but now it's out in the open and nobody cares because we're all discussing the evacuation. The one that stuck to mind the most was that there was this story about this unit. It was called basically a bunch of like American commandos. I had thought this morning that they were called Unit 343, but then I looked it up and I couldn't find anything relevant. And so I don't remember what the number was, whether it was like Unit 34, Unit 43, something like that. But what was important was that the Taliban that these sort of American death squad guys were exactly that. They were a death squad. Their whole purpose was like, oh yeah, go to villages and like kill suspected militants. And it's like, okay. And then the story came out, it's like, oh yeah, in 2019, the members of this squad had conducted like 10 raids and killed 51 people, all of them civilians. All of them with like absolutely no evidence that they had anything to do with the Taliban. And it's like, is that okay? Is that something that should be sustained? Is that something that is a good idea in a modern war? This is something that we really aren't seeing, in my opinion, discussed enough. People kind of look at the sort of Afghanistan sort of evacuations. They're seeing like the horror shows, the massacres, the bombings, and I agree that they're terrible and they were, a huge tragedy. Heart bleeds, but then at the same time, what is the alternative? Like, are you going to sit and pretend that it's, always going to be like that? So I've gotten a comment here. I'll just make a point of replying to comments. James Sinfield says, you mentioned factions, which is such a Tudor concept. And ironically, Taliban do also kill based on conjecture. In your opinion, is Islam a motivating factor of this group or simply lust for power? Well, of course it's a motivating factor. Like, it's their central ideology plank is, oh, we're going to create sort of an Islamist state. We're going to create like a state that's going to be, following the sort of Quran, the laws, and all of the, curtail the right to women and so on. And I've seen some people kind of argue like, oh no, it's just the sort of lust for power. And it's like, but lots of people have kind of lust for power, but then they don't motivate their own troops and don't have their own people be like, oh yeah, the central ideology is, the religion and having, following religious law. So of course it's a motivating factor, especially as I suspect for like the ground troops, the foot soldiers. I wonder what you think of that thought, James. But in the meantime, I think I'm going to let some other people have a talk. Yes, other people who have their own opinions and their own weird, strange things that they say. And I'll catch you all again very, very soon.
The valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday. And what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. What am I saving or investing for?